To the man who really matters, she purred, glass raised, perfectly manicured fingers catching the chandelier light like claws. Her lips curled around the words with the ease of someone who thought the punchline wasn't her. Laughter scattered around the room, small, unsure, polite. Like everyone had glanced sideways before chuckling, trying to decide whether it was a joke or an execution. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the very people who had once watched me dig this company out of the mud with nothing but 2 overdrawn credit cards and an ulcer. Now they leaned in toward David, nodding like he'd invented something. He hadn't. What he'd done, what they didn't know yet, was far more interesting. Claire's wine sloshed slightly as she leaned closer, elbow against my chair, like the proximity was still hers to claim. "Lighten up," she whispered in that performative gentle voice she used on donors and toddlers. "It's just a toast. Right, just a toast. At my company's 10-year celebration dinner. At my firm's penthouse banquet room, reserved 3 months in advance with the executive chef I personally poached from Paris. At the table where the engraved plaque bearing my name sat in the center, flanked by 2 flutes of untouched champagne and 1 very public betrayal. The man seated beside her, David in his too tight vest and knockoff Rolex, flashed me a wink like he thought this was some kind of initiation rite. Like he was being welcomed into the empire. He wasn't even original enough to be dangerous. But he was arrogant enough to be useful. That, at least, I could respect. I clinked my glass silently, then brought it to my lips and let the champagne sit on my tongue. Bitter. Flat. Overpriced. I swallowed anyway. Not for them. For the moment. Because this moment had been designed. Not by her. Not by him. By me. Claire thought she was striking a blow. She thought the sting of her words, of publicly declaring her new man, the one who really matters, would carve some scar across my legacy. But she'd mistaken silence for submission. She'd always done that. Mistook calm for weakness, measured pauses for passivity. I used to correct her. Now I simply watched. From the corner of my eye, I caught the CTO squirm. Janine, my old friend and co-founder, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her gaze flicking from Claire to me, then back. She knew me. She knew something was wrong. Not because I reacted, but because I didn't. I let them finish the toast. I let the guests awkwardly sip, then chatter away as if nothing had just happened. Claire laughed too loudly. David patted her knee. Somewhere behind me, a violinist resumed playing. I checked my watch. 9:17 p.m. 14 hours from now, HR would send out a calendar invite labeled Urgent Compliance Review. 15 hours from now, David would be in a beige conference room with 1 working ceiling light, trying to pretend he understood legal language as well as he pretended to understand strategy. 17 hours from now, Claire would realize she wasn't in the joke. She was the joke. Because what she didn't know, what no one in that glittering room of wine-sipping sycophants knew, was that the very consultant she was praising had already been caught. Red-handed. Digitally, forensically, and irrefutably. And the emails he sent, the files he accessed, the proprietary prototypes he exported, all of it was tied to her laptop. Her network. Her name. Not his. She thought she was presenting a new chapter of her life. A fresh man, a clean slate. A poetic upgrade to parade in front of the man who once paid for her master's degree and her mother's hospice bills. But what she was really doing was introducing the lead character in her own downfall. In a scene I'd already written, directed, and wrapped. Claire had always believed in showmanship. Grand entrances. Dramatic declarations. Toasts that turned heads. Fine. She got one. And now, she was going to get the rest. Not all at once. Not loudly. But meticulously, like frostbite setting in, quiet, irreversible, and far too late to fix once you finally feel the damage. So I smiled. Not because I forgave. Because I had already started counting. Not champagne bubbles, or toasts, or applause. I was counting pages. In the black mat folders sitting in my lawyer's briefcase. And every page was numbered. Every page was time-stamped. Every page bore her name. 6 months before Claire lifted that glass like a dagger, I was staring at a timestamp on a server log that didn't make sense. 2:14 a.m. Not unusual in itself. We had offshore developers in India and a skeleton crew in Seattle who occasionally worked late. But the file accessed was one of our most sensitive, a prototype model for our new dynamic memory module. Not just the blueprint, but the simulation software, stress test data, and vendor pricing overlays. The kind of thing that doesn't just get opened. The file name flashed again as I dug deeper. Exported. Not just viewed, exported. I cross-referenced the IP. And that's when my stomach tightened, not from panic, but from the cold muscle memory of a younger me. A version that once worked black box penetration contracts for companies too scared to admit they were bleeding internally. The IP wasn't ours. It was residential, suburban, local, far too local. That night, I didn't alert IT. I didn't run a ticket through the system. I picked up a burner phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in 9 years, Ash. The kind of guy who wears his hair too short, his hoodies too black, and his secrets like body armor. Still paranoid? He said by way of hello. No, I replied, just awake. Within 72 hours, Ash had tunneled into everything with the grace of a ghost. He didn't leave breadcrumbs. He didn't even breathe on the system. What he found wasn't a smoking gun. It was a slow, consistent leak. Dozens of files. Always late at night. Always the same machine. And always routed through a residential Wi-Fi connection just west of the city. You've got a rat, he said. But the rat's wearing silk pajamas and thinks Netflix covers their tracks. I already knew the address. I recognized the MAC ID of the router before Ash even confirmed it. It was Claire's house. Well, Claire's new house. The one she bought after the divorce, when she decided being married to a man who worked 16-hour days wasn't fun anymore. The one where she supposedly lived alone while rediscovering herself and trying out pottery or yoga or whatever the hell her latest therapist told her was empowering. She wasn't the thief. That was too obvious, too blunt force. Claire's sins were never bold. They were always passive, always justified in her own little monologue. No, she wasn't smart enough to hack my systems. But she was stupid enough to leave a man like David unsupervised, on her couch, using her laptop while she microwaved oat milk or read self-help books. And David, as Ash pointed out with the amusement of a man dissecting an amateur, was using her device, her login, her home network. Because Claire, my deeply self-absorbed ex-wife, had set her MacBook to auto-login with her old company credentials, the ones she'd never bothered to disable, the ones I told her to delete 3 years ago when we separated and she insisted she might want to stay in the loop. That loop was now a noose. But I didn't pull it. Not yet. Because the more Ash dug, the more interesting it became. This wasn't a one-time grab. This was a sustained operation, files timed with competitor funding rounds. Data that mapped perfectly to our lost vendor bids. Each leak costing us tens of thousands. One, potentially millions. I instructed Ash to go deeper, but invisibly. Like we were photographing a crime in progress, not stopping it. I wanted timestamps, devices, network fingerprints. I wanted mirrors of every export. Full packet captures. And more than anything, I wanted silence. You sure you don't want to stop him now? Ash asked during one call, voice low. No, I said, pouring myself a scotch. Not yet. Because back then, I still didn't know what exactly David was sending or who was receiving it. I wanted the full chain, and I wanted Claire in it. Not for vengeance, but for certainty. If she was knowingly involved, that would be one thing. But if she was being used, really used, then I wanted the moment she realized it to be crystalline. Documented. Preserved. So I waited. And while I waited, Ash built the report. It was ugly. Cleaner than most corporate thefts, but still messy around the edges. Sloppy file paths, stupid reuse of email headers, an Outlook draft folder that David never cleared properly, Slack messages half deleted but recoverable from app storage backups. I almost pitted him. Almost. I handed the data to my private legal team under NDA. They created a duplicate archive, sealed with chain of custody procedures. Then I locked the master folder in a briefcase that hadn't seen daylight since I left the cybersecurity world. One of those zero-tolerance biometric locks that beeps if you even sneeze wrong near it. That folder became a loaded gun, and I didn't aim it at David. I aimed it at the part of Claire that still believed she could walk into my world, call it hers, and insult the man who built it, without consequence. By the time the company dinner rolled around, the gun wasn't just loaded. It was cocked, and the only thing left was to watch her hand me the trigger. Claire always kept her laptop on the kitchen island, right next to the ceramic bowl full of organic lemons and the stack of unread wellness magazines. It was her life hub, she once called it. Calendar, meal plans, Pinterest boards, and the occasional leftover access to my corporate drives, though she'd never admit to still using that last one. It was automatic, she claimed. She just hadn't gotten around to cleaning out her saved logins. No malice, no intent. Just laziness masquerading as innocence. Her specialty. But intent doesn't matter in digital forensics. Only access. Only trails. And every one of David's steps had left a trace. The full report landed on my desk 3 weeks after Ash started digging in earnest. It arrived in a plain cardboard envelope with no label, hand-delivered by a courier who didn't speak a word to my secretary. Inside were 87 pages of meticulous digital surveillance, annotated screenshots, time logs, and internal schema overlays. I read it twice. David had used her laptop, to siphon project data straight from our private servers and forward them to a company called LiteraCore, one of our newer, flashier competitors. They'd appeared out of nowhere 2 years ago, suddenly undercutting our memory compression contracts in defense and automotive. I'd suspected there was a leak somewhere. I never imagined the pipeline ran through Claire's Wi-Fi. The first wave of shock passed quickly, not because I wasn't angry, but because the precision of the betrayal demanded something colder. This wasn't a lover's spat or some half-drunk indiscretion. This was data theft, industrial espionage, and the woman who once scolded me for paranoia had unknowingly left the front door wide open. Every exported file came from a user session tagged Claire_MacBook. Every metadata tag listed her device name, her network, her geolocation. David hadn't even changed the host name. The fool was so convinced of his own cleverness that he didn't bother covering his tracks. But in the most painful twist of all, Claire wasn't part of the plot, at least not actively. She'd served the crime up to him like a home-cooked meal and walked away to stir risotto. He'd used her laptop during dinners, during yoga live streams. During the nights, she left him just one glass of Chardonnay and wandered upstairs early. Ash had timestamps showing activity windows that lined up perfectly with her Netflix streaming history. She had no idea, not a clue. While she planned garden renovations and posted filtered sunsets, David was dragging files into zip folders and emailing them from a burner Proton Mail account titled quartzintel@pm.me. The subject lines were pathetic: Client Schema 5, Beta Layout Updated, You'll Love This One. Attached, Proprietary Architecture Diagrams. Projected Unit Costs. Internal Engineering Notes with Confidential Vendor Contact Information. A decade of intellectual property, drained out in 50 megabytes chunks. But what made the blood leave my face wasn't the theft. It was the note David included in one of the early emails. Claire's access is a goldmine. She doesn't even realize the permissions still work. He knew. He knew the laptop belonged to her. He counted on it. Ash had pulled a backup from the machine's virtual memory pool. Buried in an autosave cache was a PDF Claire had opened weeks earlier. Her original onboarding agreement from back when she was my spouse and had minor access to the company's strategic planning docs. Her initials were still visible at the bottom. We had moved on. She had not logged out. I took a long breath and closed the folder. Then I poured a glass of water I didn't drink and stared out the window of my office for a full 10 minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I did. Claire would never survive federal scrutiny, not emotionally, and definitely not financially. If LiteraCore got subpoenaed, if even one lawyer got a whiff of how their consultant obtained our IP, the fire wouldn't stop with David. It would burn through Claire, her assets, her name. I could hear her voice in my head already. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. How was I supposed to know? But ignorance isn't a defense. Not here. Not when she had signed the spousal access addendum. Not when her digital signature sat at the bottom of the very policy that defined negligent facilitation of corporate espionage. Not when her Wi-Fi logs mapped every packet sent. Not when her own laptop auto-filled the VPN credentials that let David slide in undetected. I remember sitting back in my chair, running a fingertip along the edge of that report. Claire had once told me I was cold. You don't feel anything, she said the day she left. You just process everything like it's math. No, I feel things. I just let the numbers lead. And the numbers had led me straight to this. Her crimes weren't passionate. They weren't loud. They were ordinary. Stupid, even. But they were still crimes. And she had no idea that the man warming her bed was also the one preparing to sell her future for stock options and a leased Audi. I didn't tell anyone. Not then. Because when you know you're holding the bomb, you wait for the moment everyone else lights a candle. It was always buried in the fine print, right between the arbitration clause and the non-disparagement agreement. Clause 6.14, subsection C. Knowingly or unknowingly facilitating unauthorized data extraction constitutes material breach of contract and liability under federal IP law. I wrote it myself. Or rather, I insisted on it, down to the commas, when we were still in year 3 and couldn't afford a full-time legal team. Back then, most of the board thought I was being paranoid, overly cautious. You think someone's going to sneak in and smuggle out our prototypes in their gym bag? One of them joked during a budget meeting. No, I didn't think it. I knew it. Because I'd seen it. Before I was a founder, I was a fixer. Digital cleanup. Backdoors. Ghost audits. My job had been to find the cracks companies didn't know they had, and exploit them, legally, before someone else did illegally. And one thing I'd learned? The biggest leaks don't come from hackers in basements. They come from unlocked laptops, unsecured guest Wi-Fi, and someone's dumb trust in the wrong person sitting on their couch. So I inserted the clause. Then I made it universal. Every employee signed it. Every board member. Every spouse with system access, including Claire, back when we were still married, and I thought love and logic could coexist. She signed it with a quick flick of her wrist during our tax planning session, barely glancing at the packet. You and your documents, she laughed. Always so dramatic. I nodded. Said nothing. But I had a scan of that page. A hard copy, too. Ink still slightly smudged from the glass of red wine she'd knocked over that night. Her initials were curled, rushed, dismissive, still legally binding. And now, years later, my attorney had printed out an updated clause list and placed it on my desk. Fresh ink, clean font, same explosive language. The clause hadn't changed, but the context had. She's cooked, he said, flipping the folder closed with a soft thwomp. Sloppy or complicit? I asked, not looking up. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. The contract doesn't care. Ignorance doesn't nullify liability, especially when the data in question is tagged as proprietary and access came through a credentialed portal linked to her ID. I nodded slowly. That was the thing most people never understood about corporate law. Intent is a luxury of criminal court. But in IP law, it's about chain of access. It's about digital footprints. About what you enabled, willingly or not. Claire could cry all she wanted. She could argue she was just being kind, letting David catch up on some work while she meditated in the sunroom. But none of that erased the timestamps, or the device metadata, or the autologin logs pulled from her machine, or the contract she'd signed, line 47, page 3, signature clear as day under the liability clause. I didn't include the clause out of bitterness or some petty obsession with control. I included it because I'd always suspected that one day, someone close to me would take the easy route, that someone would assume my silence meant permission. It didn't. It meant preparation. Claire had made her choices, and David had made his, but neither of them had read what they signed. That was always the trick. Make the contract look like a formality. Bury the dynamite where they'd assume it was dust. Most people skip to the signature page, glance at the summary, and click accept. But the fine print? That's where the weapons are hidden. Claire's access had been grandfathered in after the divorce because she never formally revoked her spousal-level clearances. She said she just wanted to stay in the loop, and I, foolishly, had let her, mostly because I was too busy keeping the company alive to fight over a login. But the waiver she signed never expired. It didn't even require renewal. It simply sat there, enforceable, immutable, waiting for the moment it would matter. Now it mattered, because every file David stole, every document he forwarded, every byte of our private architecture that slipped into a competitor's hands, they were traced. Through her machine. Through her credentials. Claire hadn't just been careless. She'd been contractually negligent. And negligence, in our world, isn't some slap on the wrist. It's breach. It's liability. It's hers. I kept the original waiver in a separate file, along with the original draft of the clause I'd written years ago. My initials were still penciled in next to the edits. I had highlighted one sentence back then. I remembered it because I'd reread it so many times. Access is not ownership. Facilitation is not innocence. She never read it, but she'd signed it. And soon, she'd realize what that meant. Not because I'd yell, but because a federal investigator would read it to her, slowly, deliberately, and without interpretation. Just the words she never cared to understand. The same ones I never forgot. The folder didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It didn't even bear a logo. Just matte black. No branding. No gloss. No embossed seal. It wasn't made to impress. It was made to end conversations. The kind of folder that looks like it holds a death certificate even before it's opened. I had it custom assembled. 3-hole punched, archival sleeves, numbered tabs. Not because I needed the presentation, but because I needed her to see the precision. Because I needed Claire to understand this wasn't some fit of emotional retaliation. This was documentation. Cold. Boring. Unarguable. And it wasn't for David. He was a pawn. Overconfident. Reckless. Replaceable. Men like him always are. No, this was for Claire. The person who once sat beside me through 17-hour pitch meetings, who helped pick out the company name over cheap wine and worse pizza. The person who'd signed the waiver and laughed when I asked her to read it. Ash's team had done their part beautifully. Page after page of forensic data, perfectly formatted. Network logs mapped to time zones. Timestamps layered with device IDs. The router's DHCP logs pulled via legal request from the ISP. Every device on her network, every handshake protocol, every DNS query logged, and aligned to exact UTC down to the second. On page 18, a screenshot of her MacBook system preferences showing the saved VPN credentials she never deleted. Page 24, a mirror of the stolen file directory from our R&D drive, highlighted in red, matched to the versions David sent externally. Page 37, a metadata dump showing that the files weren't just accessed, but edited. And worse, renamed. The new titles matched the schema literature used in their patent filings 3 months later. Sloppy, brazen, provable. Page 49, a Slack export. Ash had cracked David's side login from a recovery file Claire never knew auto-synced. A message from David to someone tagged only j.corpadmin. She still doesn't get it. I'm basically ghosting through her account. You'll get the files tonight. Keep your name off the metadata. Her account. Her account. Not our account. Not some random open terminal. Hers. She was the front door, and David hadn't even bothered to close it on the way out. We included everything, even the most minute evidence. A recovered email draft David deleted too late. A copy of the IP handoff log from the router when Claire's phone disconnected and David's laptop grabbed priority. An AI-generated timeline alignment that showed Claire watching Hulu on her iPad at the exact moment David sent the final zip file to a Proton Mail alias. He didn't even encrypt it properly, just renamed the extension. It would have been funny if it weren't so stupid. And then, on top of all that, clipped neatly to the folder's first divider, was the note. Handwritten. Short. No legalese. No threats. No sarcasm. Just 6 words. I told you to log out. Signed with my initials. Just like I used to do when I left her reminders on the fridge. Next to the calendar. Or taped to her car keys when she forgot her fob again. Claire always treated details like they were optional. Like someone else would handle them. She was charming enough that most people did. But charm doesn't erase network logs. We waited another 3 weeks before finalizing the presentation. I wanted the timing perfect. I wanted to see the folder passed across the table under neutral lighting, HR fidgeting in the corner, David's face smug and stupid, and Claire, just confused enough at first to not feel the bomb until page 3. Because this folder wasn't meant to frighten her. It was meant to prove something. That I had seen everything. That I hadn't screamed. That I hadn't chased. That I'd simply documented, cataloged, timestamped. That while she was busy making David feel important, I was quietly proving she was exposed. And worse, that she'd signed her own exposure years ago. In ink. With a flourish. I didn't tell legal to destroy her. I told them to corner her. With facts. With time. With protocol. To make her realize that every toast, every smirk, every glint of superiority she'd aimed at me had already been rendered irrelevant by the quiet diligence of someone she thought was too emotionally constipated to care. But I cared. I just used a printer instead of a voice. The folder was ready. Claire wasn't. At 9:02 a.m. sharp, inboxes across the exec floor pinged with a meeting invite no one had expected, but everyone instantly prioritized. Subject: IP compliance breach review. Immediate attendance required. Time: 9:30 a.m. Location: room 14B. Attendees: internal only. Legal present. No agenda. No pleasantries. Just cold language that smelled like trouble. Most ignored it. Assumed it was some mid-level cleanup. Maybe an intern screwing up a permissions setting. Compliance meetings always felt performative. Boring. Long, full of phrases like best practices and data hygiene. No one ever imagined it could be something real. David, however, was delighted. He waltzed in at 9:26, espresso in hand, wearing the smug uniform of a man who thought proximity to chaos made him important. 14B. He muttered to himself like he'd been summoned to lead it. He liked to be early. Not because he was punctual, but because he enjoyed watching others walk in after him. It made him feel centered, observed, like he owned the oxygen in the room. The HR rep was already there. Rachel, young and visibly tense, shuffling papers with trembling fingers and glancing at her watch too often. David mistook that for nerves about presenting. He gave her a little nod, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'll steer the room." Then came Claire. She arrived with her phone still in her hand, scanning the invite again, lips parted slightly. She looked confused. Not scared. Not yet. Just confused enough to irritate David. Babe, they probably need us for context, he said casually, reaching to brush a non-existent speck off her jacket. You know how disorganized things have been lately. Half the systems team still thinks I'm freelance. She blinked, eyes darting from him to Rachel, who didn't make eye contact. That doesn't explain why my name's on the primary line, Claire murmured, more to herself than anyone else. David shrugged. Probably a formality. Relax. Then the door opened again, and I walked in. I didn't say a word, just nodded to HR and placed a slim briefcase on the table. The room's oxygen shifted. David blinked. Claire stared. Behind me came one more person, my attorney, sharp-suited, silver-haired, no laptop. He carried only the matte black folder. He didn't sit, just stood beside me and placed the folder dead center on the table, like a holy text about to be opened. David chuckled. Wow, we getting serious now. I didn't look at him. I looked at Claire. Please have a seat, my lawyer said smoothly, gesturing toward the two chairs opposite us. This is not an open forum. It's an internal compliance meeting with potential escalation. David rolled his eyes and flopped into the chair. Claire didn't move. She was still holding her phone, still trying to make sense of the atmosphere. Escalation, she said. Wait, what is this? HR coughed. There's been a breach. A significant one. And your name appeared in the initial chain of custody. She laughed nervously. My name? I don't even have access anymore. My lawyer opened the folder and slid the first 2 pages toward her without speaking. Printed screenshots. Metadata tags. A table showing timestamps cross-referenced with her device ID. A digital footprint so precise it might as well have been a surveillance camera in her living room. She froze. Her phone lowered. Her eyes scanned. Then again, David leaned over her shoulder. Still cocky. All right, that's a little dramatic. Let's not act like VPN logs are the Constitution. VPN logs are how we know which device authenticated the breach, my lawyer replied coolly. And they're not the Constitution. They're Exhibit A. Claire turned toward me slowly. You're behind this. Still no words from me. David scoffed. Look, we get it. You don't like me. Big whoop. But dragging Claire into this. Now I spoke. David, I said, tone flat, almost bored. How many export packets did you queue between 11:42 p.m. and 12:09 a.m. 3 Fridays ago? He blinked. What? The zip files. Labeled Final Architecture Package 5. The one sent through Proton Mail. From her laptop. Over her Wi-Fi. Claire whispered, wait, what? David tried to pivot, tried to smirk. But the room wasn't playing along. And I wasn't done. Because we have the logs. Not screenshots, logs. Full packet captures. And a subpoena ready to drop on Litera Core. Rachel from HR looked like she might pass out. Claire was visibly trembling now. You knew this? David opened his mouth. But before he could form another word, my lawyer reached into the folder, removed a USB drive, and placed it gently on the table. Contained here is the mirrored data of every breach attempt, every login, every IP conflict, and a full reconstruction of the Slack conversations David attempted to delete from a secondary session logged into her account. If we wanted revenge, you wouldn't be in this room. You'd be in custody. Claire stared at me, lips moving without sound. David's shoulders twitched. He opened, then closed his mouth like a man trying to swallow air that had turned to cement. I checked the time. 9:34 a.m. Right on schedule. They were just beginning to realize. This wasn't a meeting. It was a firing squad. Silent. Clinical. Bloodless. But final. The silence in room 14B thickened into something physical the moment the folder touched the table. No dramatic speeches. No accusatory glares. Just the soft SHFF of synthetic cardstock gliding over polished laminate. His lawyer didn't say a word, just slid it toward her like a dealer laying down the final card. Claire reached for it with the mechanical politeness of someone on autopilot, still assuming this was some misunderstanding that would be resolved by page 2. David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes flicking toward my face as if waiting for a punchline. She opened the folder. The air changed by the time she hit page 3. Page 1 was a courtesy, cover letter from our legal team, formal tone, calm language. Page 2 outlined the clause she'd signed, her signature clean and smug in the margin. Page 3 was the first printout. Timestamps, VPN access logs, Wi-Fi router assignments. Her device, her login, her IP, mapped down to the minute she streamed that yoga video, while David sent 6 files to a Proton Mail alias. Her fingers froze, pinched around the paper like they might tear through it. Then they began to tremble. Subtle at first, like a chill. Then sharper. The kind of shake you get when your body recognizes a threat your mind hasn't caught up to yet. She flipped to page 4. Email headers. A screenshot of David's draft folder with attachments named after our proprietary module configurations. Page 5. File metadata. Creator, Claire_MacBook. Network path. Home, private, 1B. Page 6. The Slack export. Still no clue. She's upstairs watching Chef's Table. Sent 3 packages. 1 more coming tonight. The words were in black and white. The timestamp was 11:03 p.m. Her hands started to curl in on themselves. She blinked rapidly, then looked up, as if she could somehow unsee it all. Her voice cracked. I didn't know. She whispered it again, softer, like repetition might dilute the damage. I didn't know. I didn't. David shifted in his chair, leaning in to peek at the page. She jerked the folder away. His hand paused in midair, then withdrew slowly, fingers flexing like he was resisting the urge to grab it back. The expression on his face had started to sour, confidence draining, replaced by something far more calculating. He knew what was coming now, and she knew she was already in it. Claire turned to me, not angrily, not defiantly. She didn't even look like the woman who toasted the man who really matters less than 24 hours earlier. That woman was glossy, theatrical, unbothered. This woman was pale, lips parted, staring at me like I held the rope already wrapped around her ankles. What do we do? Not he, not David, not they, just we. Like we were a unit again. Like the folder in her hands hadn't detonated the bridge between us a second time. This time with paperwork and chain of custody tags instead of shouting. I didn't answer. I didn't nod. I didn't frown. I didn't even blink. I just turned my head toward my lawyer. He understood. Ms. Langford, he said quietly, your exposure here is significant. Your name appears in access logs tied to federally protected prototypes. Whether you were complicit or not isn't our burden to prove. It's your burden to disprove. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No defense. No excuse. My lawyer continued, calm and almost bored. There's a narrow window for cooperation before this escalates to outside counsel. If you'd like to retain representation, now would be the appropriate time. David looked up sharply. Whoa. She didn't do anything. I mean, I might have used her laptop a few times, sure, but she was the authenticated user. My lawyer cut in. The system sees no difference. Claire flinched like she'd been slapped. She didn't authorize anything, David insisted, already slipping into damage control, already creating a wedge between them. Claire turned to him, eyes wide. David, but he was already halfway out of it in his mind, already imagining a version of events where he was just an opportunist, not a thief, where she was the reckless one, the careless one. I didn't send the damn emails, she shouted, her voice breaking under the strain. No, I said finally, the only word I'd spoken all morning. Everyone looked at me. No, you didn't, I repeated. You just handed over the keys and walked away. She covered her mouth with one hand, still holding the edge of the folder with the other, as if it might disappear if she just let go. But it didn't, and it wouldn't. The folder stayed. Heavy, inevitable, like the truth it carried. She didn't go back to her office after the meeting. She didn't even go back to her car right away. Claire sat on the bench just outside the executive wing's glass corridor, still gripping the matte black folder like it might bite her if she let go. The sunlight was too bright. Everything felt sharp, too loud. Even the rhythmic hum of the landscaping crew trimming the hedges seemed accusatory. Her phone buzzed in her purse 3 times before she finally dug it out with fumbling hands. Not David, not HR, not even her sister. It was just a news alert. Something mundane. She swiped it away, then opened her contacts. Gregory Shane, attorney. She'd used him during the divorce. Not because he was the best, but because he was discreet and didn't ask questions that made her feel small. She thought she'd never need him again. She was wrong. The phone rang once. Twice. He answered on the third, voice dry, professional. Gregory Shane. She tried to keep her tone steady. Failed. Greg, it's Claire Langford. Pause. Claire. It's been a while. I need to ask something. Hypothetically. Another pause. You're not calling about your HOA again, are you? She didn't laugh. No. It's about my laptop. Someone may have used it. Without my knowledge. And I think they transferred some files. Greg's tone shifted immediately. Files? What kind of files? Proprietary. From my ex-husband's company. The same one she cut herself off. It doesn't matter. But it wasn't me. I didn't do anything. A pause. Then, measured. Claire. What competitor were the files sent to? She swallowed. Literacore. Silence. Greg. Jesus, Claire. His voice had dropped. All warmth gone. That's not just a competitor. That's a contractor. They're on federal defense projects. DARPA, DoD. If your machine facilitated data transfer to them, knowingly or not, you're in violation of multiple IP statutes. And, depending on jurisdiction, potential espionage liability. Her breath hitched. Greg, I didn't know. He said he was watching Netflix. He didn't respond right away. Then, where are you? Sitting outside HQ. Alone? Yes. Good. Stay there. And listen to me very carefully. She gripped the phone tighter. You're not going to speak to HR again. You're not going to speak to your ex-husband. And you're definitely not going to speak to David. Do you hear me? Why? Because they've built the case. You saw the folder, didn't you? She closed her eyes. Yes. Metadata, access logs, your VPN keys, your device fingerprint. If they brought that to a meeting, then they've already handed the full package to outside counsel. They're offering you a chance to cooperate before they pull the trigger. Cooperate how? She whispered. Flip. That word hung there, ugly and final. Flip on David. Turn over everything. Communications. Timelines. Any messages. Every instance where he touched that machine. You need to provide more than they already have. Otherwise, you're not a witness, Claire. You're a co-defendant. Her voice cracked. Greg, I didn't authorize anything. I didn't even know. It doesn't matter, he said. Cold. Flat. They'll say you should have. You had reason to suspect. Your device, your network, your login. That clause you signed, the one in the folder, makes it your burden to prove you didn't help him. Her lips were trembling. So what do? You cut him loose. The words landed like a gunshot. He's not your anything, Greg snapped. Not anymore. Not when he used you like a VPN with a pulse. He threw you in front of a train, Claire. I guarantee you, he's already trying to reposition himself as some clueless contractor caught up in an internal politics mess. You think he won't roll on you? She was silent. Then, do I go to the feds? You wait. They'll come to you. But when they do, you need to walk in with documentation and a timeline that makes you the whistleblower, not a bystander. She clutched the phone to her ear like it was her last connection to the surface. Greg, I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know. I believe you, he said, finally softening. But they won't. Not until you prove it's him or you. And right now, they're leaning toward both. Her eyes blurred. The sky above was cloudless, unreasonably bright. Someone laughed across the lot, and it made her stomach twist. I don't want to do this, she whispered. Too late, Greg said. This isn't about what you want anymore. It's about who burns first. The line went dead. Claire sat frozen. She'd come to the celebration dinner with a glass raised high and a new man on her arm. Now she sat in silence, realizing the applause had faded. The lights were off. The stage was cold. And the only thing left was fallout. It didn't unravel with fireworks. No sirens. No shouting. Just a series of dull, methodical collapses, like dominoes toppling in an empty boardroom. Quiet. Final. Unavoidable. David was the first to go. The very next morning, security walked him out. No jacket. No farewell email. Not even a box of desk junk to carry. Just a black visitor's badge in his hand, and 2 guards flanking him like he might suddenly break into song and start explaining everything. He didn't. He didn't say a word. He walked past the open-plan bullpen with his shoulders puffed up and chin high, but the sweat under his collar gave him away. No one spoke. No one looked up. No one wanted to risk guilt by proximity. I watched from the mezzanine through the glass. David paused at the building's exit for a moment, maybe hoping Claire would show up. Maybe expecting someone to tell him it was all a mistake, that he was too charming, too strategic, too connected to be cut like this. No one did. By 11:20 a.m., his login credentials were scrubbed. His internal messaging threads archived. His parking access revoked. His name was never mentioned again in any official meeting. It was as if he'd been hired in pencil and erased with one drag of the palm. Claire came next. Not in handcuffs. Not in tears. Just a single-page notice. Administrative leave pending internal and external review. It was polite. Sanitized. But the meaning underneath it was acidic. You're not fired. Yet. But you're radioactive. Her keycard was disabled that afternoon. IT pulled all company-issued devices from her home the following morning under a cooperative clause in the signed NDA. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She just stood in her robe as two men with white gloves placed her laptop and router into an evidence box lined with foil and anti-static sheeting. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. The house itself was tagged for digital imaging by week's end. Claire had tried to plead with Greg, her attorney, to delay it, to argue it was excessive. He reminded her, flatly, that this was no longer a private investigation. The FBI Cyber Division had been looped in via federal liaison after the scope of LiteraCore's usage was confirmed. Claire's network had carried proprietary defense-aligned schema, whether she knew it or not. That made it federal, which meant privacy was now a courtesy, not a right. She left the house that night and checked into a hotel registered to her firm-approved travel card. It was frozen by morning. The firm didn't make a splash about it. No press conference. No bravado. Just a one-paragraph update posted internally and leaked, strategically, to the industry press within 48 hours. Following the discovery of an internal data breach involving proprietary project materials, appropriate actions have been taken. The involved individuals have been removed from their roles, and third-party review is ongoing. Our commitment to confidentiality, security, and federal compliance remains absolute. There were no names, but they didn't have to say them. The industry knew. LiteraCore issued a separate statement. Defensive, brittle, lawyered to death. They insisted they had no knowledge of the origins of the submissions and that all suspicious materials had been discarded. Their CEO went dark. Their stock dipped 3 points in a single trading session. Claire's phone was seized 2 days later. Greg negotiated a limited cooperation clause to avoid immediate formal charges, but the terms were strict: full disclosure, zero omissions, and complete data access. She signed, because she didn't have a choice anymore. From my office, I watched it unfold, not with joy, not with glee, but with something colder. Closure. There were no celebrations, no corks, no gotcha speeches, just a silence that settled over the company like snow after a storm. People knew. They didn't say it, but they knew. They'd seen the folder. They'd read the clause she'd signed. They remembered the toast. They remembered her voice, glass raised high, to the man who really matters. And now they knew how quickly that man had disappeared, and how thoroughly the one she mocked had already prepared. I closed my office blinds that Friday afternoon. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Because the storm was over, and all that remained was the wreckage. She reached out through Greg. Wouldn't call directly. Wouldn't email. Just a message relayed through a reluctant lawyer. Claire would like to speak. Privately. One time. Not about the case. Just one time. I let it sit for a full day before replying. We met at a neutral cafe, one of those upscale boutique places with exposed brick, artisanal pastries, and chairs designed more for aesthetic than comfort. No photographers, no corporate eyes, just two people who used to know each other, now sitting across from one another like strangers bound by a past both of them would rather forget. She was already seated when I arrived. Hair pulled back, no makeup, hands fidgeting with a napkin she had torn halfway into ribbons. Not the woman who once strutted into our launch party in heels that cost more than my first laptop. Not the woman who clinked a glass in front of my investors and made herself the main event. Just Claire, stripped down and shaking. I sat down across from her, said nothing. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't respond. She blinked, swallowed. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't think. I mean, how could I? Still, I didn't say a word. I let the silence do the work. Her eyes began to glisten. You knew. You knew for months, didn't you? I nodded once. The napkin in her hand tore completely in half. I thought it was just us. You and me. That we had moved on. That it was over. But this, she exhaled sharply. This feels like revenge. No, I said calmly. This feels like math. She looked up, eyes narrowing. So that's all I ever was to you? An equation. No. But the risk you created, that was. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. You planned this, she said. You didn't just catch us. You planned it. Every step. You had a folder. A lawyer. A damn script. I leaned forward, my tone low. Controlled. I didn't plan this to destroy you, Claire. I planned it to protect what I built. She stared at me, stunned. You really think I meant to? No, I interrupted. But that's the problem. You never mean anything. You just allow things. She recoiled like she'd been slapped. You didn't read the clause. You didn't delete the credentials. You didn't ask why your boyfriend needed access to a laptop with privileged internal systems. You just smiled and handed over the keys. She looked away. The cafe around us buzzed with quiet conversation. Soft music. Laughter somewhere near the window. We were in a different world entirely. Claire turned back, her voice quieter now. I didn't know how far he was taking it. I thought he was ambitious. Smart. I didn't know. I let her trail off. Then she tried one more time. I just want to understand one thing, she whispered. Why didn't you yell? Why didn't you scream at me? Call me out? Humiliate me like I did you? I finished my coffee. Set the cup down gently. Then I looked her in the eye. You made a toast, I said. In a room full of people. A room I built. You raised a glass to a man who was gutting my company from the inside using the laptop I told you 3 years ago to log out of. She flinched. You called him the man who really matters. Her lips trembled. And you're asking why I didn't yell? I said, almost laughing. Claire, I didn't need to. She sat in stunned silence. Tears running now. Nothing dramatic. No sobs. Just a slow, steady unraveling. I stood up. Left a 20 on the table. Out of habit, not symbolism. Before walking away, I looked at her one last time. Everything that happened, you didn't plan it. But you enabled it. And I planned around you. That's the difference between us. She didn't reply. She just stared at the coffee cup I left behind. Like it might still contain a version of me that was easier to manipulate. But that man had vanished the moment she clicked accept on a waiver she never read. And the man who remained, he didn't raise his voice. He just raised the stakes.